अनम्यूट कर दे भाई. Okay. All right. Okay. Tushar sir, I look like Tushar sir. अरे भाई. Okay. Unmute कर दे भाई. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So let's continue with where we left. We have done this. This is the polysynaptic and spinal reflexes. All right. Now let's go on to the motor pathways. Yes, motor pathways. Let's see the motor pathways. Now, which are the motor pathways? Let's see, motor pathways or the descending motor pathways. These are also known as the descending tracts, right? Motor pathways or the descending tracts, right? Motor pathways or the descending tracts. Now, if you look at the motor pathways or the descending tracts, now these are divided into there are two major divisions of the descending tracts. The descending tract or the motor pathway. Nitya Borad, A alpha is causing contraction and relaxation. If A alpha is stimulated, contraction. If A alpha is inhibited, muscle relaxation. है ना? Inverse stretch reflex में A alpha was inhibited क्योंकि inhibitory neuron था, right? और stretch reflex में A alpha was stimulated, so muscle contraction थी. ठीक है? Now what are the descending tracts? Like I said, the descending tracts have got two major divisions. The descending or the motor pathways, there are the medial descending tracts, right? You have the medial descending tracts, and you also have the medial descending tracts, and you've got the lateral descending tracts, medial descending tracts and the lateral descending tracts. The motor pathways can be divided into medial descending tracts and the lateral descending tracts. Medial descending tracts, these are for axial muscles. These are for the axial muscles, right? Medial descending tracts are for the axial muscles. And the lateral descending tracts, these are for the distal muscles. Distal muscles. Medial descending tracts are meant for tone and posture. These are meant for tone and posture, whereas the lateral descending tracts, these are meant for fine, skilled movement. The lateral descending tracts are meant, they control the distal muscles, and these distal muscles are responsible for the fine, skilled movements. Right? So you've got the medial descending tracts for the axial muscles for tone and posture, and the lateral descending tracts which are for distal muscles or fine skilled movement. Now the lateral descending tracts are of two types. There is the lateral corticospinal tract. Lateral corticospinal tract. Lateral corticospinal tract, which is also known as the pyramidal tract. Lateral corticospinal tract or the pyramidal tract, and the second one is what is known as the rubrospinal tract. Rubrospinal tract, and rubrospinal tract is what is also known as the alternate pathway. Alternate pathway, lateral corticospinal tract or the pyramidal tract, and the rubrospinal tract or the alternate pathway. Right? Now, these control the distal muscles, and they are meant for fine skilled movement. And if you look at these two tracts, they control the A alpha. Now, A alpha, they control the A alpha motor neurons, and the A alpha motor neurons, especially of the flexors, and especially of the upper limb flexors, because which are the muscles which are involved in fine skill movement? For example, using a small what are involved in fine skill movement? Flexors of the elbow, flexors of the wrist, small muscles of the hand. So these tracts which are responsible for fine skill movement, they control the A alpha motor neurons, especially the flexors, and flexors also, which flexors? Mainly flexors of the upper limb. They control the flexors mainly of the upper limb. right? Please remember these lateral corticospinal tract, rubrospinal tract, they will control the A alpha motor neurons of upper limb, lower limb, flexors, extensors, all muscles. But mainly, especially the upper limb flexors. Upper limb flexors receive a much higher innervation than the other group of muscles, right? So they receive the highest innervation. So these tracts will supply the upper limb flexors because, like I said, upper limb flexors are involved in fine skilled movement. Now, there was a neat question which was asked, and what was this neat question? Neat question says that which extrapyramidal tract functions like the pyramidal tract, right? Which extrapyramidal tract functions like the pyramidal tract? Which extrapyramidal tract functions like the pyramidal tract? And the answer may be the rubrospinal tract, isn't it? Rubrospinal is an extrapyramidal tract. It is not pyramidal. Anything which is not pyramidal is extrapyramidal, and it functions like the pyramidal tract. So this is known as the rubrospinal tract. Rubrospinal tract is an extrapyramidal tract which functions like the pyramidal tract. Remember the lateral descending pathways, these are involved in fine skilled movement, and they supply the A alpha, especially of the upper limb flexors. Let's have a look at the medial descending tracts. The medial descending tracts are anterior corticospinal tract. Number 2, it is the tectospinal tract. What is tectospinal tract? Tectospinal tract means from the tectum to the spinal cord. Tectospinal tract. Then another one is the vestibulospinal tract. Vestibulospinal tract, right? From the vestibular nuclei and the medulla to the spinal cord, vestibulospinal tract. Then you have the reticulospinal tract. Reticulospinal tract. Yes, reticulospinal tract. Now, what is this reticulospinal tract? Reticulospinal tract is divided into 2 types. There is a pontine or the facilitatory or the excitatory tract. There is a pontine or an excitatory, or also known as the facilitatory reticulospinal tract. And you also have a medullary or the inhibitory reticulospinal tract. Pontine or the excitatory or the facilitatory tract, and the medullary or the inhibitory tract. Right? So these are your 4 tracts, or actually 5 tracts, which are meant for tone and posture: anterior corticospinal tract, tectospinal tract, vestibulospinal tract, and the reticulospinal tract. Now, a little more detail, and that is, if you look at the anterior corticospinal tract, tectospinal, and the vestibulospinal tract, they supply the A alpha. Now they supply the extensors, mainly the extensors. Why the extensors? Because extensors of the lower limb are involved in erect posture, right? Erect posture. So these will supply especially the lower limb extensors. Please understand, they will supply, like I said, mainly the lower limb extensors receive a much higher innervation from these tracts, because the extensors of the lower limb help you to stand straight. For example, the hip extensors, the knee extensors, they help you to stand straight. They are involved in erect posture, right? So these are your A alpha, especially of the lower limb extensors. The pontine tract will excite the A gamma fibers, not the A alpha, A gamma, especially of the lower limb extensors. And the medullary or the inhibitory tract, this will inhibit the A gamma of the lower limb extensors. Please remember this. We have already discussed, whenever there is an increase in the A gamma discharge, it increases the muscle tone. Have you understood? Which muscle tone is it going to primarily affect? It is going to affect the muscle tone, especially of the lower limb extensors. Yes, I've told you that the medial descending tracts are meant for tone and posture, right? So the reticulospinal tracts will affect the A gamma discharge and therefore affect the muscle tone. Please be very careful. Which are these tracts and which neurons do they supply? If you look at the lateral descending tracts are lateral corticospinal and rubrospinal. They supply the A alpha, especially of the upper limb flexors. The medial descending tracts, anterior corticospinal, tectospinal, vestibular spinal tract, they are for A alpha, especially of the lower limb extensors. Retrospinal tracts are meant for A gamma. The pontine or the excitatory tract will increase the A gamma discharge and therefore increase the muscle tone. And the medullary or the inhibitory tract will decrease the A gamma discharge and decrease the muscle tone. So this is the classification of the descending tracts or the motor pathways. Descending tracts or the motor pathways. Now, let us have a look at the corticospinal tracts. Let's see the corticospinal tracts. Now, as far as the corticospinal tract is concerned, what is the origin of the corticospinal tract? What is the origin of the corticospinal tract? Corticospinal tract will arise from, number one, the primary motor cortex. Primary motor cortex. Shloke, it is written right in front of you. Pontine is an excitatory tract which increases A gamma discharge. Medullary is an inhibitory tract which inhibits the A gamma discharge. Okay? So there is a primary motor cortex. This is also known as area. This is the precentral gyrus. Oh, स्तुति कर लेंगे बेटा spinocerebellar. जो कर रहे हैं उसके ऊपर तो concentrate करो. वो तो कर लो कम से कम. If I'm not responding, that means that's a certain thing. I want you to concentrate on this. फिर ये नहीं समझ आएगा. फिर बाद में बोलेंगे corticospinal repeat करो. Primary motor cortex, this is the precentral gyrus. Right? Precentral gyrus. And this is area 4. Precentral gyrus, and this is area 4. Yes? Primary motor cortex will contribute 30% of the fibers. 30% of the fibers will be from the primary motor cortex. Primary motor cortex. Yes? Then you have the premotor and the supplementary motor areas. Premotor and the supplementary motor areas. Premotor and the supplementary motor areas. Premotor and the supplementary motor areas, this is area 6. Area 6. This will contribute another 30% of the fibers. 30% of the fibers. That means 60% of the fibers of the corticospinal tracts will arise from primary motor, premotor, and supplementary motor areas. And number three is going to be the sensory cortex. A very, very important point here. Somewhere in one of your app-based or something, it is given that sensory cortex contributes sensory fibers. No, that is not possible. Sensory, yes, these fibers are arising from the sensory cortex, but these are motor fibers. Sensory cortex, that is areas 3, 1, and 2, they will contribute 40% of the fibers. 40% of the fibers come from the sensory cortex, but these are motor. These are not sensory fibers, these are motor fibers. Right? So the origin of the corticospinal tract is from primary motor cortex, 30%, which is the precentral gyrus or area 4. Premotor and the supplementary motor areas, which is 30%, area 6, and sensory cortex. Motor fibers from the sensory cortex will be 40%. Okay? Now, if you look at, there is something known as the motor homunculus. Yes, let me just show you the motor homunculus as well. What does the motor homunculus look like? This is what is the motor homunculus. Yes, if you look at the motor homunculus, now there is a map of the body even in the precentral gyrus. This is the motor homunculus. Okay? This is the motor homunculus. Right? This is in the precentral gyrus. Now here, More complicated movements have larger cortical representation. In the sensory cortex, more sensitive areas have larger cortical representation, right? This is more complicated movements will have larger cortical representation. So there is going to be a slight difference. More complicated movements will have a larger cortical representation, right? They have a large cortical representation, right? They have a large cortical representation, yes? Now, which are the ones which are going to have, so this is what a motor homunculus, like I said, looks like. Now here, in the motor homunculus, the muscles of vocalization, right? Like I said, primary motor cortex, which has got the motor homunculus. In the primary motor cortex, yes, or the motor homunculus, the muscles of vocalization. Vocalization is the most complicated voluntary activity, motor activity. So largest is for the muscles of vocalization. Like I said, muscles of vocalization will involve the laryngeal muscles, pharyngeal muscles, the tongue muscles, the facial muscles. So these muscles of vocalization have the largest cortical representation, right? Second largest cortical representation will be for the muscles of mastication. Muscles of mastication. And number three, it will be for the muscles of the thumb. Muscles of the thumb. Thumb also has a very large cortical representation in the motor cortex because unlike we are the only animals with a opposing thumb, right? We have an opposing thumb, and that is the reason why muscles of thumb also have a large cortical representation. The smallest cortical representation will be for the muscles of the trunk. Muscles of the trunk. This is going to be the smallest cortical representation, right? This is what happens in the primary motor cortex, right? Primary motor cortex. Let's have a look at this tract and how does it descend downwards. So let's see the lateral corticospinal tract and the anterior corticospinal tract. Let's see the corticospinal tracts. Let's see the corticospinal tracts. Yes, this is the midline here. Yes, midline here. Now these fibers which arise from area 4, area 6, areas 3, 1 and 2, they pass through the internal capsule. They pass through the internal capsule, right? They pass through the internal capsule. These fibers which arise from the area 4, area 6, areas 3, 1 and 2, they pass through the internal capsule. And these fibers of the corticospinal tract and the corticobulbar tract, they occupy the anterior 2/3 of the posterior limb, anterior 2/3 of the posterior limb. Anterior 2/3 of the posterior limb will be the corticospinal tract. Corticospinal tract. And the genu. Genu is corticobulbar tract. Corticobulbar tract, right? This is the anterior 2/3 of the posterior limb, which is the corticospinal tract, and the genu, which is the corticobulbar tract. Corticobulbar tract, right? The right? Now, from the fibers descend downwards. The fibers descend downwards from the internal capsule, they descend downwards. Remember, the internal capsule, this is a very small area where these fibers are very densely packed. Very densely packed. Whenever there is a lesion of the internal capsule, a lesion here gives rise to a dense hemiplegia. This is the a lesion of this particular area, a lesion in this area gives rise to a dense hemiplegia of the opposite side. Dense hemiplegia of the opposite side, isn't it? There is a dense hemiplegia on the opposite side. Okay? Now, okay. So, what is located in the posterior 1/3 part? Posterior 1/3 part, you have the posterior 1/3 part is where you have the sensory fibers, isn't it? This is where the fibers of the medial lemniscus and the anterolateral system, medial lemniscus and the spinothalamic tract, which is also known as the anterolateral system, they lie over here. But where are the motor fibers? Motor fibers are in the anterior two-thirds of the posterior limb and the genu. What lies in the anterior limb are, of course, fibers from the thalamus to the frontal lobe, fibers which connect the cortex with the corpus striatum and all that. But what is present in the anterior two-thirds of the posterior limb are the motor fibers. Genu is corticobulbar, and the medial lemniscus and anterolateral system in the remaining part of the posterior limb. From here, the fibers will descend downwards and they reach the medulla. Fibers descend downwards and they reach the medulla. And in the medulla, there is going to be, in the medulla, 80% of the fibers, they cross over to the opposite side. 80% of the fibers, they cross over to the opposite side. And this crossing of the fibers to the opposite side, this is what is known as the motor decussation. This is known as the motor decussation. Minidar, what is confusing? I'll repeat this once again. Minidar, especially for you, and that is fibers from these different areas, area 4, area 6, area 3, 1 and 2, they pass through the internal capsule and they occupy anterior two-thirds of the posterior limb and the genu. Corticospinal tract is in the anterior two-thirds of the posterior limb, and genu has got corticobulbar. What is corticobulbar? Cortex to bulb. Bulb is medulla. There are cranial nerve nuclei in the medulla. So corticobulbar, like the 12th nerve nucleus, which is present in the medulla. Corticobulbar, right? Now, so corticospinal, anterior two-thirds of the posterior limb, and the genu is corticobulbar. Like I said, a lesion of this area, which is very common. In fact, it is the commonest lesion in the CNS. This is thromboembolic phenomena of the middle cerebral artery, which is the commonest lesion, and that is responsible for a dense hemiplegia of the opposite side. Why dense hemiplegia of the opposite side? Because, like I said, fibers are densely packed in this very small area. If there is a lesion of this area, it results in a dense hemiplegia of the opposite side. Sensory fibers, medial lemniscus, which are formed by posterior column, anterolateral system, anterior spinothalamic tract, lateral spinothalamic tract are occupying the remaining part of the posterior limb. Now, as these motor fibers, as they descend downwards, remember, sensory are going towards the cortex. We are talking of the motor fibers. Motor fibers, as they descend downwards, they reach the medulla. In the medulla, 80% of the fibers will cross over to the opposite side, which is called the motor decussation. Motor decussation results in the formation of pyramids. Motor decussation will result in the pyramids. And these fibers which have crossed over to the opposite side, these 80% of the fibers which have crossed over to the opposite side, they form the lateral corticospinal tract. And lateral corticospinal tract is also known as the pyramidal tract. Pyramidal tract, yes? And we've already done the lateral corticospinal tract will supply the A-alpha motor neurons, which goes towards the distal muscles. We have already discussed that the lateral corticospinal tract is meant for fine skilled movements, distal muscles. So this is responsible for what is known as the fine skilled movements. Yes, fine skilled movements. Now you would ask this question. That why is the pyramidal tract known as the pyramidal tract? Pyramidal tract is known as the pyramidal tract because it forms the pyramids in the medulla. Because of the pyramids, this is known as the pyramidal tract. What forms the pyramids in the medulla? Motor decussation. What is motor decussation? 80% of the fibers of the corticospinal tract cross over to the opposite side. They form the lateral corticospinal tract or the pyramidal tract. Why is it known as the pyramidal tract? Because, like I said, it forms the pyramids in the medulla. The remaining 20% of the fibers, they do not cross the midline. They remain uncrossed, and this forms the anterior corticospinal tract. Anterior corticospinal tract will supply the axial muscles. This is involved in posture, right? So these are the anterior corticospinal tract. 20%. So anterior corticospinal tract is the uncrossed tract. Naman Agarwal, pyramid is sort of if you remember the diagram of the medulla, pyramid is sort of a bulge which is seen on the anterior surface of the medulla. That is what is known as pyramids. It's a bulge which is visible. Even all diagrams show that bulge. That is your pyramids. Okay? It's a bulge. So anterior corticospinal tract is an uncrossed tract. Lateral corticospinal tract is a crossed tract. Anterior corticospinal tract is formed by fibers which have crossed over to the opposite side. That is for fine skilled movement. Anterior corticospinal tract is an uncrossed tract. They do not cross to the opposite side. Yes. Now, remember, the anterior corticospinal tract, in fact, supplies the axial muscles of both sides. It supplies the axial muscles of both sides, but please remember, it is still an uncrossed tract. We do not call it a crossed tract, right? Towards the termination, the fibers are supplying the axial muscles of both sides, but we do not call it a crossed tract. Crossed is pyramidal tract, uncrossed is anterior corticospinal tract. Okay? So this is as far as your the corticospinal tract is concerned. Okay? Okay. Abhishek, this is not a sensory tract. Remember, thalamus was the relay is for sensory tracts. These are motor tracts that we are talking about, isn't it? Right? All right. Okay. No, beta. Lateral is even anterior corticospinal. You don't call it bilateral or unilateral. There is an anterior corticospinal which is on the right side. There is an anterior corticospinal tract which is going to supply the left side, isn't it? If there is a lesion of the middle cerebral artery or the Charcot's artery, of, let's say, the right side, the dense hemiplegia is of the left side. If it is a lesion of the left side, there's a dense hemiplegia of the right side, isn't it? It's the opposite side which is affected. Okay? Where is the crossing taking place, Sankalp? Medulla. Medulla is the site where there is a crossing. That is why you've got that is why you have those pyramids, isn't it? That is why you have the pyramids. Okay? So this is as far as your corticospinal tracts are concerned. Okay? Now, next is let's have a look at the reticulospinal tract. Reticulospinal tract. Now, as far as the reticulospinal tract is concerned, a little more detail about the reticulospinal tract. Now, reticulospinal tract is an extrapyramidal tract which is controlling tone, isn't it? It is controlling the A-gamma fibers, right? It is controlled the A-gamma fibers. Okay? Yes, Rohan, axial muscles are supplied by the anterior corticospinal of both sides. That is why whenever there is a lesion of the internal capsule, what is primarily affected is fine skilled movement. Most patients have some control over their posture. Have you understood? But what is affected primarily? There is complete loss of fine skilled movement. Why are they able to control their posture somewhat is because the axial muscles are supplied by anterior corticospinal tract. Anterior corticospinal tract towards the termination supplies the axial muscles of both sides. Axial muscles means they control the proximal muscles are also known as axial muscles. Okay? Proximal muscles. Tika, Harika beta, you must remember what is the motor pathway. Corticospinal tract will supply the A-alpha motor neurons. What are the A-alpha motor neurons? Their cell bodies lie in the anterior horn of the spinal cord. We've been discussing this since last time and even today. Have you understood? Okay? Again, Nitesh, I've already discussed upper motor neuron and lower motor neuron with you. Okay? All right. बेटा ये हम लोग motor pathway कर चुके हैं. We have already done the motor pathway. See, when I say corticospinal tract, this is the lateral corticospinal tract. We have discussed this. It goes into the spinal cord. It goes into the spinal cord. In the anterior horn of the spinal cord is the A-alpha motor neuron, which is also known as the lower motor neuron. Lateral corticospinal tract is known as the upper motor neuron. This is known as the lower motor neuron. Yes? Where is the cell body of the A-alpha motor neuron? Anterior horn of the spinal cord. What controls the A-alpha? A-alpha will be present in each spinal segment. Cervical, thoracic, lumbar, sacral. You will have these A-alpha motor neurons which are controlled by the pyramidal tract. Yes? So there should not be a problem. Right? Now, when we look at the reticulospinal tract, let's see this. Let's have a look at the reticulospinal tract. Now, like I said, reticulospinal tract, there are two types of reticulospinal tract. There is a pontine tract and there is a medullary tract. Now, so I can divide the reticular formation into a pontine reticular formation and a medullary reticular formation. Pontine reticular formation and a medullary reticular formation. Yes? I'm making it side by side. So of course, medullary reticular formation will be lower and pontine will be higher, isn't it? But I'm just making it side by side for, this is a diagrammatic representation. Okay? Now, the pontine reticular formation is an excitatory area. Medullary reticular formation is an inhibitory area. Pontine reticular formation will give rise to a pontine or an excitatory or a facilitative pontine or an excitatory or a facilitatory reticulospinal tract. Reticulospinal tract. And this reticulospinal tract will now increase the A-gamma activity. I've already discussed it with you. The two tracts which control A-gamma activity are the reticulospinal tracts. Yes, they increase the A-gamma activity. A-gamma activity, especially in the lower limb, extensors, right? Especially in the lower limb extensors. And I told you, A-gamma is responsible for muscle tone, right? So it increases the A-gamma activity. In other words, it increases the muscle tone, and primarily in which muscles? The lower limb extensors. Remember, lower limb extensors are involved in erect posture. The medullary or the inhibitory reticular formation will give rise to a tract which is known as the medullary or the inhibitory reticulospinal tracts. Reticulospinal tracts. And these inhibitory reticulospinal tract will inhibit the A-gamma activity. Pontine tract will increase the muscle tone. The medullary tract will decrease the muscle tone. These are, now somebody was saying, what is extrapyramidal? You have a pyramidal tract, which is for fine skilled movement. Extrapyramidal tracts, that means extra means which are not pyramidal, other than pyramidal, right? So, which are the extrapyramidal? Rubrospinal, anterior corticospinal, tectospinal, vestibulospinal, reticulospinal. Which extrapyramidal tract functions like the pyramidal tract? Rubrospinal. This reticulospinal is also extrapyramidal. This is involved in muscle tone. How is the reticulospinal involved in muscle tone? Pontine tract increases A-gamma activity, increases muscle tone, especially in the lower limb extensors. Medullary reticular formation gives rise to a medullary or an inhibitory reticulospinal tract, which decreases A-gamma discharge and decreases muscle tone. Okay? Now, both the pontine and the medullary areas, they receive excitatory fibers from the cortex. Cortex will send excitatory fibers to both the pontine and the medullary areas. This is known as the corticoreticular fibers. Corticoreticular fibers. These are from cortex to the reticular formation. These are excitatory fibers. Corticoreticular. Corticoreticular also passes through the internal capsule. Corticoreticular also passes through the internal capsule. Right? Now, RF is reticular formation. Reticular formation is an area which is present in the brainstem, medulla, pons, right up to the midbrain. It has a role in controlling tone and posture. How does it control tone and posture? Because it gives rise to two reticulospinal tracts. Pontine, which is an excitatory tract, which increases A-gamma activity, and the medullary, which is an inhibitory tract, which decreases A-gamma activity. Now, the pontine area also receives collaterals. Pontine area also receives collaterals from all the ascending tracts. What are ascending tracts? Ascending tracts are sensory, pain, touch, temperature. They give collaterals to the pontine area, and they will also excite the pontine area. Pontine area receives excitatory impulses from both the cortex as well as collaterals from sensory tracts. Right? These receive collaterals from the sensory tracts. Okay? Now, if there is a lesion of the internal capsule. That is the commonest site. Yes, we have already discussed. What is the commonest lesion in the CNS? The commonest lesion in the CNS, commonest lesion is a thromboembolic phenomena. Thromboembolic lesions, lesion of the middle cerebral artery. Middle cerebral artery, especially the, what you know, middle cerebral artery, which supplies the posterior limb and the genome. Right? So middle cerebral artery, yes, middle cerebral artery, especially the branch of the middle cerebral, which is called the Charcot's artery, right? Thromboembolic lesion. So what you see, which causes a UMN paralysis. Yes, so there is going to be loss of fine skilled movement of the opposite side. There is a loss of fine skilled movement of the opposite side, and we can understand that. Isn't it? Fine skilled movement of the opposite side. Why is there a loss of fine skilled movement of the opposite side? Because of corticospinal tract fibers being affected. Yes. So there is a dense hemiplegia. There is a dense hemiplegia of the opposite side. Dense hemiplegia of the opposite side. What will happen to the tone? What will happen to the tone of the opposite side? There is an increase in the muscle tone. There is increase in the muscle tone. There is also a hyperreflexia. Reflexes are going to be exaggerated on the affected side. There is an increase in muscle tone and hyperreflexia on the affected side. Now let us try and see, why is there increase in muscle tone? Why is there a hyperreflexia on the affected side? Reflexes are exaggerated. Yes, if you've seen a patient of hemiplegia, you will understand this. In fact, the tone, there is a it's so difficult to extend his elbow. There is a spasticity that you see. There's a huge increase in muscle tone, right? Now let's try and understand, why is there going to be increase in muscle tone? So if there is a lesion of the internal capsule, corticospinal tracts will be affected, right? And also what is going to be affected are corticospinal tracts will be affected, as well as the corticoreticular will also be affected, right? Corticoreticular are also passing through the posterior limb of the internal capsule. So these are affected. That means what? That means this connection is gone. The excitatory fibers from the cortex to pontine reticular formation and medullary reticular formation are gone. Corticoreticular fibers are destroyed. Okay? Corticoreticular fibers are destroyed. That means now the medullary reticular formation is inactive. It receives no excitatory impulses. Medullary reticulospinal tract is inactive. Inhibitory control over the A gamma is gone. But pontine area continues to receive impulses from ascending tracts. So pontine area is now going to be excessively excited. Pontine area is responsible for increased activity of A gamma. And what is A gamma meant for? Muscle tone. So what will happen to muscle tone? Muscle tone will increase. Yes, this is the reason why you get an increase in muscle tone in a patient of hemiplegia. Because along with involvement of pyramidal tract, there is involvement of, along with destruction of corticospinal fibers and corticobulbar fibers, there is also the corticoreticular fibers which are going to be affected. Corticoreticular fibers are affected. That means inhibitory reticular formation is inactive. Inhibitory control over A gamma is gone. Pontine area now becomes overly active. Pontine area gives rise to a pontine or an excitatory or a facilitatory reticulospinal tract, which causes a huge increase in A gamma activity. What is A gamma activity responsible for? muscle tone. Which muscles? The extensors, primarily. This is why you get increased tone on the affected side. Okay? If you look up, if you remember your lines which are given in your books, why is there increased tone in upper motor neuron lesions, in internal capsule lesions? It says, along with involvement of pyramidal tract, there is involvement of extrapyramidal tract. Which is the extrapyramidal tract which is getting affected? Medullary. Medullary or the inhibitory reticulospinal tract, which is no longer active now. Yes, loss of activity of the inhibitory reticulospinal tract will now cause, which causes loss of inhibitory effect of A gamma, but pontine tract will be active. So A gamma activity increases, tone increases. ठीक है? अब देखो क्वेश्चन पूछो, लेकिन थोड़े से ढंग के क्वेश्चंस पूछना प्लीज. इट्स द एंड ऑफ द डे. ओके, ठीक है. अब एक बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग सा पॉइंट, ठीक है. कॉर्टिको-रेटिकुलर, कॉर्टेक्स टू रेटिकुलर फॉर्मेशन, कॉर्टिको-रेटिकुलर, कॉर्टिको-बल्बर, कॉर्टेक्स टू बल्ब और मेडुला, कॉर्टिकोस्पाइनल, कॉर्टेक्स टू स्पाइनल कॉर्ड. ठीक है? ऑलराइट. Now, the increased tone is apparent immediately after thromboembolic event, ma'am, or is it a delayed response? क्यों बेटा? It is seen ना, जब भी thromboembolic, तभी तो आप diagnose करते हो upper motor neuron lesions because there is exaggerated reflexes on the opposite side. No? Okay. All right. Okay. Now, if you remember, what is Gendra 6 maneuver? Let's try and see what is the concept behind the Gendra 6 maneuver. What is the concept behind Gendra 6? What is Gendra 6? Gendra 6 is you are trying to elicit a knee jerk, लेकिन आ नहीं रहा है, right? You cannot elicit a knee jerk, especially in the exam. You can't get it. So what do? You ask your subject to hook his fingers like this. Yes. When he hooks his fingers like this, yes, he is increasing the sensory input from the tips of his fingers. That means there is increased input from the ascending tracts to the pontine area. And pontine area is excitatory, right? So Gendra 6 maneuver, in Gendra 6, there is an increase A gamma activity. Yes. There is an increase in the A gamma discharge. Why is there an increase in the A gamma discharge? Because sensory input from the tips of the fingers, collaterals go to pontine area. Pontine area gets excited. The pontine or the excitatory tract is now increases activity. It increases the A gamma discharge. And once the A gamma discharge is increased, this now increases the muscles spindle sensitivity. It increases the muscle spindle sensitivity and you get an excellent knee jerk, right? That is your okay. Okay, all right. Okay, so this is as far as your, remember Gendra 6 maneuver. In Gendra 6 maneuver, the sensory input, what happens in Gendra 6 maneuver, I can write it down. Gendra 6 maneuver. In Gendra 6, this you do when you do not get a stretch reflex. You're trying to elicit a biceps jerk or a triceps jerk or a knee jerk and you cannot get it. In a normal individual, this is nothing abnormal. This is something which you do in your patients. Yes. So Gendra 6 maneuver, what you happen, there is an increased sensory input. There is an increased sensory input, which increases the activity of the pontine reticular formation, right? Increase pontine reticular formation. And increased activity of the pontine reticular formation means it increases the A gamma discharge. And if there is an increase in the A gamma discharge, it increases the muscle spindle sensitivity, so that now when you tap the tendon, you get a very good response. Yes, if you remember the line which is given in Hutchison, and that is Genresix increases the muscle spindle sensitivity. Yeah. Same feeling, bro. Kya ho gaya, Sonat, Sachin? Let me see. अरे बेटा, pontine को corticoreticular fibers to the pontine area will go. There is no doubt. Corticoreticular fibers तो destroy होंगे ही. Cortical control over pontine and medullary reticular formation will both reduce. Yes, but in the case of the pontine area receives excitatory impulses from all the sensory tracts. जितने भी pain, touch, temperature के tracts हैं, they give impulses to the pontine area. So pontine area continues to be active, right? Pontine area continues to be active. That is why you get an increase in A gamma discharge. Okay? Same thing, clenching of the teeth or sensory input from the fingers, you are increasing the sensory input into the pontine area via the collaterals. Right, via the collaterals, and that is so. Remember, Genresix is Ajay Kumar Reddy. A gamma beta spinal hai. These are spinal motor neurons, but A gamma we have discussed it is meant for the intrafusal muscle fibers. Okay, all right. Yes, all due to collaterals. Ajay Sarma, bilkul theek hai. All sensory inputs except fast pain. Exactly. Okay. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. Okay. Rubrospinal, tectospinal tract also. Okay. A gamma motor fibers originate in the pontine. नहीं. A gamma किधर होंगे? Ajay Kumar Reddy, मैंने बोला ना, spinal है बेटा. Anterior horn में A alpha, A gamma दोनों होंगे. ठीक है? Okay. All right. Same thing. Clenching of teeth or locking the fingers will increase the sensory input to the pontine area. Okay. See, what do you mean by increasing muscle sensitivity, Shilpa Chandran? That means basically, जब A का discharge बढ़ता है, the ends of the intrafusal muscle fibers will contract. If the ends of the intrafusal muscle fibers will contract, the intrafusal muscle fibers are stretched. Have you understood? If they are stretched, it is like the strings of a guitar, right? अगर गिटार का string stretched है या गिटार का string loose है, if there is a loose string, the sensitivity reduces. If it is stretched, if it is tight, sensitivity increases, and that's exactly what happens here, right? Compare it to a guitar string. Have you understood? That is what is meant by increase in muscle spindle sensitivity. चलो, ठीक है. Okay. Now, this is as far as your reticulospinal tract is concerned. Next, let's go on to another important part in the motor system, and that is the cerebellum. Hi. Meet thanki cortico-reticular, cortico-bulbar. Cortex से reticular formation becomes cortico-reticular. Cortex in medulla becomes cortico-bulbar. ठीक है? Thromboembolism क्या होता है बेटा? Thrombus या embolus या hemorrhagic lesion. ठीक है? Okay. All right. Next we are going to look at the cerebellum. An important part of the motor system is the cerebellum. Now, what is cerebellum meant for? Now, to remember the cerebellum, remember there are 3 parts of the cerebellum, 4 pairs of nuclei, and 5 cells. 5 cells, 3 parts, 4 pairs of nuclei, and 5 cells. This is how you're going to remember the cerebellum. There are 3 parts, 4 pairs of nuclei. That means there are 8 nuclei in total. 8 nuclei, 4 pairs, and there are 5 cells. Yes? Now, if I look at the cerebellum, yes, if I look at the cerebellum, yes, this is what it looks like. Beta, Vaishnavi, hyperreflexia is exaggerated reflexes. When reflexes become exaggerated, we call it hyperreflexia. Hyperreflexia is a sign of upper motor neuron lesion. Okay? Okay. Now, what are the 3 parts of the cerebellum? The first part of the cerebellum is this one, which is called the flocculonodular lobe. This is the flocculonodular lobe. And what is the flocculonodular lobe? This is what is known as the vestibulocerebellum. Vestibulocerebellum. This is your flocculonodular. It has got direct to and fro connections with the vestibular nuclei. Vestibular nuclei in the medulla. Vestibular nuclei in the medulla. Right? There is a flocculonodular lobe or the vestibulocerebellum. This has got direct to and fro connections with the vestibular nuclei. This is the oldest part of the cerebellum. When I say oldest part of the cerebellum, what do I mean by that? That means in terms of evolution, this part of the cerebellum developed first. Flocculonodular lobe is involved in balance. This is involved in balance and in eye movements. This is involved in balance and eye movements. Yes, flocculonodular lobe is involved in balance and in eye movements. See, what are the 2 important signs? 2 important signs of cerebellar disease. 2 important signs of cerebellar disease. There is ataxia and nystagmus. Okay? Ataxia and nystagmus. We can explain this because, like I said, vestibulocerebellum is involved in balance and in eye movement. Flocculonodular lobe. Okay? Adarsh, lingula is an anatomical classification. I'm doing a functional or a physiological classification. Okay? So this is balance and eye movements. This has been asked as a neat question. What is the function of the flocculonodular lobe? This is involved in balance. Now, this is the second part is what is known as the spinocerebellum. Yes, second part is what is known as the spinocerebellum. Spinocerebellum is involved in motor coordination. Spinocerebellum is involved in motor coordination. Okay? Spinocerebellum will be involved in motor coordination. Okay? The medial part of the spinocerebellum, that means in the midline, this is involved in, this is the midline here. So the medial part of the spinocerebellum, this is involved in coordination of the axial muscles. The lateral part of the spinocerebellum, this is involved in coordination of the distal muscles. Medial part for coordination of the axial muscles, lateral part for the coordination of distal muscles, right? Just like in the motor homunculus. You had a map of the body. There is a map of the body even in the spinocerebellum. Very crude map. So the limbs are represented in the lateral part of the spine of the spinocerebellum, distal muscles, lateral part. The part of the midline is meant for control and coordination of axial muscles. So spinocerebellum is involved in motor coordination. The part in the midline for coordination of axial muscles, lateral part is involved in coordination of distal muscles. The third part of the cerebellum is what is known as the cerebrocerebellum, or also known as the neocerebellum. And this is involved in motor planning. This is involved in motor planning. These are the cerebellar hemispheres. Cerebellar hemispheres. So these are the three parts. Which are the three parts? You've got floccular nodular lobe, or the vestibulocerebellum, which has got direct to and fro connections with the vestibular nuclei and the medulla. Floccular nodular lobe is involved in balance and eye movements. Spinocerebellum is involved in motor coordination. The part of the spinocerebellum in the midline is meant for coordination of axial muscles. The lateral part is involved in coordination of distal muscles. Cerebrocerebellum, or the neocerebellum, this is involved in motor planning. So three parts. Now, what are the four nuclei? There are four pairs of nuclei. The floccular nodular lobe, see, what is nucleus? Nucleus is nothing but a collection of cell bodies. Floccular nodular lobe does not have its own deep cerebellar nucleus, because it has got direct to and fro connections with the vestibular nuclei in the medulla. Right? Spinocerebellum, which is involved in coordination. Medial part, the part in the midline for axial muscle. The cerebellar nucleus which is associated is called the fastigial nucleus. Fastigial nucleus. Lateral part, which is involved in coordination of distal muscles, you've got globose and emboliformis. Globose and emboliformis, and these are called the nucleus interpositus. Nucleus interpositus. This is globose and emboliformis. This is nucleus interpositus. Nucleus interpositus. Right? This is meant for coordination of distal muscles. With cerebrocerebellum, the nucleus which is associated is dentate, which is the largest nucleus of the cerebellum. The largest nucleus of the cerebellum is dentate. This is a question, neat question which was asked. This is going to be dentate, right? Dentate. So you have these four pairs of nuclei: fastigial for axial muscles, globose, emboliformis, together known as nucleus interpositus muscles, and dentate, which is involved in motor planning. Okay? Motor planning. So three parts, four nuclei. Yes. Then there are 5 cells. There are 5 cells. Let's see which are the 5 cells of the cerebellum. The 5 cells of the cerebellum is granule cells, basket cells, stellate cells, Golgi cells, stellate cells, granule cells, basket cells, stellate cells, Golgi cells, and the Purkinje cells, right? Granule cells, basket cells, stellate cells, Golgi cells, and Purkinje cells. These are the 5 cells. Out of these, the only excitatory neuron is the granule cells, and all the others are inhibitory. All the others are inhibitory, right? So you've got granule cells, which are excitatory, basket cells, stellate cells, Golgi cells, and the Purkinje cells are inhibitory. These are 5 cells. So you've got 3 parts, 4 nuclei, 5 cells. Let's see once again, which are the 3 parts? Floccular nodular lobe, or the vestibular cerebellum, which is involved in balance and eye movements. Spinocerebellum, which is involved in motor coordination. Cerebrocerebellum, which is involved in motor planning. 3 parts. 4 nuclei. Which are the 4 nuclei? Fastigial nucleus for coordination of axial muscles, globose and emboliformis for the coordination of distal muscles. Dentate is meant for motor planning. Which is the largest nucleus? Dentate. 5 cells. Which are 5 cells? Granule cells, basket cells, stellate cells, Golgi cells, Purkinje cells. The only excitatory neuron is the granule cells. All others are inhibitory. All others are inhibitory. Okay? All others are inhibitory. Now, this is as far as your cerebellum is concerned. 3 parts, 4 nuclei, 5 cells. Now, the next important part of the cerebellum is what is the output of the cerebellum and what is the input of the cerebellum. Output and what is the input of the cerebellum. Now, when I say the output of the cerebellum, yes, output of the cerebellum can be from the cerebellum, and output can also be from the cerebellar cortex. Output is from the cerebellum or from the cerebellar cortex. There are 2 questions regarding output. Now, what is all right? See, if you have a confusion about the nuclei, there is nothing much here. There are 4 pairs. 4 pairs means 1 for either side. 1 fastigial nucleus for the left side, 1 for the right side. 1 globose for the left side, 1 for the right side. 1 emboliformis for the left side, 1 for the right side. 1 dentate for the left side, 1 for the right side. So 4 pairs. Fastigial is for the coordination of axial muscles. Globose and emboliformis are for coordination of distal muscles. Globose and emboliformis are also known as nucleus interpositus. Together they are known as nucleus interpositus. The 4th is dentate, which is involved in motor planning. Follow. Anything else now? Repeat the nuclear. Yes, fastigial is for axial muscles. Yes, anything else? Output. Output means output. Input, output. Now, what is when you look at the output? Now, when I look at the cerebellum, there is an outer cerebellar cortex, right? This is an outer cerebellar cortex. And you have the deep nuclei. You have the deep nuclei. Deep nuclei means they lie deep to the cortex. So there is an outer cerebellar cortex, and you have the deep nuclei. I've already discussed what is nucleus. Nucleus is nothing but a collection of cell bodies. There are 4 pairs of nuclei: the fastigial, globose, emboliformis, dentate. Right. So output of the cerebellum is from the deep nuclei. Output from the cerebellum is from the deep nuclei. And this is an excitatory output. That means fibers from the cerebellum which are going to other parts are from the deep nuclei, and this is an excitatory output. What is cerebellar cortex? Cerebellar cortex is the outer part of the cerebellum, which is called the cerebellar cortex. Deep nuclei lie deep to the cortex, hence the term deep. Okay? So output of the cerebellum is from the deep nuclei. Output of the cerebellum will be the deep nuclei, and like I said, this is an excitatory output. Now, this excitatory output of the deep nuclei, this is now excitatory output of the deep nuclei. This is now controlled by, a very large inhibitory neuron of this in the cerebellar cortex, which is called the Purkinje cell. And is the Purkinje cell excitatory or inhibitory? I have already discussed it with you. All neurons of the cerebellum are inhibitory except the granule cell. Okay? Now, this Purkinje cell now inhibits the deep nuclei output. It modifies the deep nuclei output. Remember, deep nuclei output is excitatory. Purkinje cell if Purkinje cell is more active, the excitatory output reduces. If it is less active, excitatory output increases. So excitatory output of the deep nuclei, excitatory output of the deep nuclei this is excitatory output of the deep nuclei is modified by the Purkinje cell. It is modified by the Purkinje cell, right? And Purkinje cell lies in the cerebellar cortex. Purkinje cell is a large inhibitory neuron. If Purkinje cell is more active, it will inhibit the deep nuclei output, right? So excitatory output of the deep nuclei is modified by the Purkinje cell. Okay? Now, so that means if I ask you a question, what is the output of the cerebellar cortex? This is going to be the Purkinje cell. Right? Purkinje cell is the output of the cerebellar cortex. So this is what is meant by output. If you have two questions here, output of the cerebellum deep nuclei, which is an excitatory output. Output of the cerebellar cortex is the Purkinje cell, and the Purkinje cell will modify the excitatory output of the deep nuclei. Now, the next important point here is, what is the input into the cerebellum? Input into the cerebellum is via two types of fibers. There are the climbing fibers, right? Output is the climbing fibers and the mossy fibers. Output is the climbing fibers and the mossy fibers. The climbing fiber, this is a strong excitatory input. This is a strong excitatory input, right? Climbing fiber is a strong excitatory input. Mossy fiber is a weak excitatory input. Climbing fiber is a strong excitatory input and the mossy fiber is a weak excitatory input. Climbing fiber is formed by fibers. This is formed by fibers of the olivocerebellar tract. Olivocerebellar tract, right? Olivocerebellar tract. What is olivocerebellar tract? Olivocerebellar tract is from the inferior olivary nucleus. From the inferior olivary nucleus to the cerebellum. See, the names are so distinctive. Olivocerebellar. From olivary nucleus to the cerebellum. Tistahar, you have written over here, confused between ascending reticular and corticoreticular. Dono alag ho gaya. Ascending means going towards the cortex. Corticoreticular means cortex to reticular formation. Have you understood? So from the name itself, you should be able to understand where does it start, where does it end. Olivocerebellar, from inferior olivary nucleus to cerebellum. Have you understood? That is why it's called olivocerebellar. Okay? Now, olivocerebellar tract, this brings proprioceptive impulses. This brings proprioceptive impulses from the whole body. It brings proprioceptive impulses from the whole body, right? It brings proprioceptive impulses from the whole body. This is inferior olivary nucleus, yes, to the cerebellum, olivocerebellar tract, mossy fibers, all other sensory tracts, all other tracts which enter the cerebellum, form the mossy fibers. They form the mossy fibers. So very, very easy question. Climbing fibers are formed by fibers of which tract? Climbing fibers are formed by fibers of the olivocerebellar tract. All other tracts, whether it is dorsal spinocerebellar, ventral spinocerebellar, cuneo-cerebellar, we've done the rostral spinocerebellar, tectocerebellar, any other tract will form the mossy fibers. And are mossy fibers strong excitatory or weak excitatory? These are weak excitatory. Okay? So this is as far as your the climbing and mossy fibers are concerned. So let's go back to the connections now, right? Let's go back to the connections. Now, somebody was asking me if Purkinje cell is more active. If Purkinje cell is more active, J. Subhashini, Jankiram, if Purkinje cell is more active, then the excitatory output of the deep nucleus is reduced. It's still excitatory. Have you understood? But that excitation reduces. If Purkinje cell is less active, the excitatory output increases. That is why I said the excitatory output of the deep nuclei is modified by the Purkinje cell. Have you got it? Right? It is the excitatory output, excitatory output of the deep nuclei, which is going to be modified by the Purkinje cell. Now let's see the connections. Now in the connections, let's see climbing fibers first. Now, climbing fiber is a strong excitatory input, isn't it? Climbing fiber is formed by only one tract, which is called the olivocerebellar tract. So, as it enters into the cerebellum, it first gives a collateral to the deep nuclei. So, what happens is it enhances the deep nuclear output. Have you got that? Climbing fibers, as they enter into the, remember, climbing fiber is carrying proprioceptive impulses from the whole body, right? And they in turn will now give a collateral to the deep nuclei and enhance the deep nuclear output, right? So that means at the start of movement, yes, deep nuclear output is enhanced. There is an increase in the deep nuclear output. How is the deep nuclear output enhanced? Right? This is because the climbing fiber excites the deep nuclear output is excitatory, so this excitatory output is increased. See, it is very, very simple here. Supposing, let's say, there is a glass which is lying on the table, and I have to pick up this glass. Yes? So, towards the start of movement, the output is enhanced. But now this output also has to be controlled. So what happens is the climbing fiber now enters into the cerebellar cortex and it gives an excitatory collateral to the Purkinje cell. If it excites a Purkinje cell, what will happen to the deep nuclear output? Reduces. Have you understood? So this is what will stop the movement. At the start of movement, the output is enhanced. Then you have to control the movement. How is that movement controlled? Because the climbing fiber will now stimulate the Purkinje cell. Purkinje cell will inhibit the deep nuclear output. Okay? Now, if you've understood this, at start of movement, enhanced output, towards the end of movement, towards termination of movement, the deep nuclear output reduces. Towards termination of the movement, there is a reduction in the deep nuclear output. How does that happen? How is the output first enhanced? Because the climbing fiber gives a collateral first to the deep nuclei and then to the Purkinje cell. Okay? Now, now let's see what happens if there is a lesion. Okay? Now let's see this. Now, we have already discussed two important points. I told you the commonest lesion in the CNS is internal capsule. And remember, I said we've discussed this in detail. If there is a lesion of the internal capsule, especially the posterior limb, dense hemiplegia of the opposite side. Commonest lesion of the CNS is the internal capsule. Second commonest lesion in the CNS is cerebellar cortex. This is the second commonest lesion of the cerebellum. Yes, second commonest lesion is going to be the cerebellar cortex. So let's try and understand this. If there is a lesion of the cerebellar cortex, that means this inhibitory control of the Purkinje cell is gone. If inhibitory control of the Purkinje cell is gone, what is going to happen? Past pointing, overshoot, rebound phenomena, intention tremors. Have you got it? Right? Somebody very correctly wrote, Pratushka, you wrote this, isn't it? That you've written over here that Purkinje cell is preventing an overshoot, which is correct. If there is a lesion of the cerebellar cortex, the Purkinje cell control over the deep nuclei is gone. So there is an overshoot, past pointing, right? Rebound phenomena, intention tremor. Why is there an intention tremor in a patient of cerebellar disease? As his hand approaches the object, there is overshoot. Then there is a visual correction which tries to bring the hand back, and that in turn results in another overshoot. So there is an intention tremor. What is an intention tremor? Intention tremor is the tremor worsens as the hand approaches the object. Is that clear? Overshoot towards termination of movement, pendular jerks, just like that. Awesome. Thank you, Mimansa. Okay, done. So this is your, if there is a lesion of the cerebellar cortex, there are going to be overshoot, rebound phenomena, intention tremors, past pointing, etc. So this is as far as your climbing fiber connection is concerned, right? This is the, then is another connection. We still haven't done the mossy fibers, right? Let's try and do the mossy fibers. Now, mossy fibers are a weak excitatory input. Okay. Mossy fibers are a weak excitatory input. Yes. Mossy fiber will enter into the cerebellum. Yes. Mossy fiber will enter into the cerebellum, and mossy fiber, like I said, is the weak excitatory input, and this will enter into the cerebellum, and this now synapses with the granule cell. This will synapse with the granule cell. This will synapse with the granule cell. And granule cell will give rise to fibers. Remember, granule cell is an excitatory neuron. Right? Granule cell is not the same thing as the deep nuclei. Deep nuclei are a separate set of cells which form the nucleus deep to the cerebellar cortex. Granule cell is an excitatory neuron. Granule cell will give rise to fibers which run which travel in the cerebellar cortex, synapsing with multiple Purkinje cells. And these fibers which run in the cerebellar cortex in both directions, they are called the parallel fibers. NEET question 2018. Parallel fibers are formed by fibers of which cell? Parallel fibers of the granule cell. Granule cell is excitatory. Excitatory cell. All other cells of the cerebellum are inhibitory. Granule cells are excitatory. Right? So parallel fibers which run in the cerebellar cortex, they are formed by parallel cells which run in parallel fibers which run in the cerebellar cortex. They are formed by the fibers of the granule cell. Right? Fibers of the granule cell. Let's see another connection. Right? This is as far as let's see another connection. Now the granule cells which are excitatory, we have already done that. Feed forward inhibition. Yes, if you remember the feed forward inhibition in the cerebellum, I made you write that. What was the feed forward inhibition that you saw? Feed forward inhibition, we discussed it at the beginning of this chapter. What is feed forward inhibition? I told you the granule cell excites the basket cells, but basket cells, they are inhibitory neurons. They will inhibit the Purkinje cells, right? They will inhibit the Purkinje cells, basket cells. So the granule cells will excite the basket cell. Basket cell is an inhibitory neuron, right? And that in turn will inhibit the Purkinje cell. I also told you the same connection. Granule cell can excite the granule cell will excite the stellate cell, and stellate cell will inhibit the Purkinje cell, right? Stellate cell can inhibit the Purkinje cell. Yes, we've discussed this already. These are A excites B, but B inhibits C. Granule cell is excitatory. Granule cell excites the stellate cell, but stellate cell will inhibit. This was feed forward inhibition. Okay? Feed forward inhibition. So let's see what are the connections in case of feed forward inhibition. Let's go back here. Yes. Now, granule cell, like I said, it excites the basket cell. This is the basket cell here. And basket cell will inhibit the Purkinje cell. Feed forward. Granule cell excites the basket cell, but basket cell will inhibit the Purkinje cell. Yes, that is known as your feed forward inhibition. We've discussed this. Yes. Another feed forward inhibition. Instead of basket cell, you can have a stellate cell. Feed forward inhibition. Granule cell excites the stellate cell, but stellate cell will inhibit the Purkinje cell. Please remember, these are minor path. Major was climbing fiber. Mossy fiber is weak excitatory input. It synapses with the granule cell. Granule cell gives rise to parallel fibers. Parallel fibers will synapse with multiple Purkinje cells. Second important point, granule cells excite basket cell inhibits Purkinje cell. Third important point, granule cell excites the stellate cell inhibits the Purkinje cell. These are both examples of feed forward inhibition. Feed forward inhibition. Right? Please remember, why is this happening? Rushikesh Wagmore, why is this happening? This is for, please remember, for fine coordination. Fine coordination, supposing I want to open the cap of a bottle. Yes? Now, some muscles have to be excited, some have to be inhibited. It is a very coordinated movement. And that is with the help of the cerebellum. Cerebellum is involved in motor coordination. Have you understood? So these circuits become important for that. Have you understood? Now, We've discussed already granule cell, basket cell, stellate cell, Purkinje cell. There's a fifth neuron which is left, and that is Golgi cell. Now let us see what is the connection of the Golgi cell. Okay? Golgi cell. Now let's see what will happen in the case of the Golgi cell. Now Golgi cell now the granule cell will give an excitatory fiber to the Golgi cell. Golgi cell will inhibit the same granule cell. It inhibits the same granule cell. This is an example of feedback inhibition. This is an example of feedback inhibition. These were two examples of feed-forward inhibition, and here is an example of feedback inhibition. What feedback inhibition involves the Golgi cell. Granule cell will excite the Golgi cell. Golgi cell will cause a partial inhibition of the same granule cell, prevents an excessive excitation of the granule cell. Okay? So you've got Rupa Lakshmi absolutely right. Climbing fibers are input fibers. Mossy fibers are input fibers. Okay? Fibers from the deep nuclei are the output fibers. So if I can just make the arrow, this is output here. Commonest lesion of the CNS, internal capsule. Second commonest lesion of the CNS, cerebellar cortex. Right? Final output will depend upon Lakshmi Prasanna upon the relative activity of climbing fiber, mossy fiber, granule cell, basket cell, stellate cell. All of them, it depends upon which one is more active. Have you understood? Okay? All right. This commonest means first commonest lesion. Kya baat kar rahe ho, Pranav? Kuch bhi. Okay. Have I written output? Sorry. No. Where have I written output? Input लिखा है climbing fibers का. Input लिखा है मैंने. Output तो नहीं लिखा. कहाँ लिखा है output बेटा? Input लिखा है. Okay. All right. So let us see now questions which have come from the cerebellum. And these are from last 2 or 3 years papers. So let's see. First question, cerebellum. Function of function of the flocculonodular lobe. What was the function of the flocculonodular lobe? This is function of flocculonodular lobe. The answer here was balance. Balance, or in that particular question, this was a neat question. Instead of balance, they had asked you equilibrium. The answer was equilibrium. Second question. Which is the most important function of the cerebellum? A, is it going to be motor coordination, or B, is it going to be motor planning? What is going to be the most important function of the cerebellum? Motor coordination or motor planning? My answer is motor coordination. Most important function of the cerebellum is motor coordination, more important than motor planning. For motor planning, I still have the basal ganglia, I have the premotor cortex, supplementary cortex. Most important function of cerebellum will be motor coordination. Next important point, which is the largest nucleus of the cerebellum? This was a Nimham's question. Largest nucleus was dentate. Dentate. Next question. Right? Next question. The only excitatory neuron in the cerebellum, is it going to be the granule cell, basket cell, stellate cell, or the Purkinje cell? Answer was granule cell. Granule cell. Next question. Which tract forms the olivocerebellar tract? Which forms the olivocerebellar tract? The olivocerebellar tract is sorry, which tract forms the climbing fibers? Sorry. Which tract forms the climbing fibers? Now your answer is olivocerebellar tract. Yes, olivocerebellar tract. Okay. Next question. Purkinje cell project 2. Purkinje cell project 2. The answer was deep nuclei. Purkinje cell project 2. Answer is deep nuclei. Yes, Purkinje cell project 2 deep nuclei. Okay. Another question. Parallel fibers. Parallel fibers are formed by. Parallel fibers are formed by. Parallel fibers are formed by fibers of which cells? Answer, granule cells. Parallel fibers are formed by fibers of which cell? Granule cells. Next question. Cerebellum has feed-forward inhibition, feed-forward inhibition, feedback inhibition, or both types of inhibition? Answer, both types of inhibition. So these are questions which have actually come, one-liners which have come from the cerebellum in last 2 to 3 years, right? In different exams, right? I can just go over them once again. What is the function of the floccular nodular lobe? The answer was equilibrium or balance. Most important function of cerebellum, if I have to choose between coordination and planning, the answer is coordination. Which is the largest nucleus of the cerebellum? The answer is dentate. Which is the excitatory neuron of the cerebellum? Granule cell. Which tract forms the climbing fibers? Olivocerebellar tract. Purkinje cell project 2, deep nuclei. Parallel fibers are formed by fibers of which cell? Granule cells. Cerebellum has got feed-forward inhibition, feedback inhibition, or both types of inhibition, and the answer is both types of inhibition. Right? Now, let us see one AIMS question which has been asked. And let me try and show that question to you. What is the AIMS question which was asked? You were given a slide like this. Yes, you were given a slide and you were given a slide like this and you were asked, you were given a histology slide. So these are very large cells which are present in the cortex, which are called the Purkinje cells. Yes, these are very large cells. If you can make this out, these are large cells which are present. These are known as the Purkinje cells. And the question you were asked was, what is the output of the cerebellar cortex? So our output of the cerebellar cortex, your answer is Purkinje cell, right? Purkinje cell. Then the another question, again, this was an AIMS question which was asked, and this was over here. Purkinje cell project 2, and the answer is deep nuclei. Again, you were given a histology slide. You can see this large Purkinje cell here. Yes, Purkinje cell project to the deep nuclei. The answer there was, of course, it was given, the name of the nucleus was given, and that was dentate. This was an AIMS question which was asked. Okay? AIMS question which was asked, right? So this is your the deep nuclei, which are deep nuclei. Purkinje cell project to the deep nuclei. Okay? Yes, these are flask-shaped cells. You can make this out. This is the slide which was shown. Okay? Okay. So this is as far as cerebellum is concerned. Let's go on to our next topic for the day, and that is basal ganglia. If you thought cerebellum was difficult, wait till you see basal ganglia. Okay. In the diagram, granule cell is stimulating either stellate or basket cell. Put them both on either side of the round. You have shown second commonest CNS lesion, cerebral cortex. Cerebellum or motor cortex, cortex, so both are parts of CNS now. So I said second commonest lesion of the CNS. Most commonest lesion or the first commonest lesion of the CNS is internal capsule. Second commonest lesion of the CNS is cerebellar cortex. Okay. अरे नहीं बेटा, उस क्वेश्चन में serenade, instead of deep nucleus, the name of the nucleus was given. That was dentate. Have you understood? Deep nucleus तो all है. Yes. But in that question, Ames question, instead of deep nucleus, dentate was given as an answer. ठीक है? All right. तो dentate deep nucleus नहीं है क्या बेटा? Vijaya, what are you saying? क्या? CF and the MF slide. Okay, you know. CF and the MF slide. ये रही. कहाँ गई? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Sudhakar, that was just the option. So Purkinje cells will inhibit all the deep nuclei, चाहे वो dentate हो, चाहे वो fastigial हो, globose हो, emboliformis. But in that question, instead of deep nucleus, dentate was given. So answer becomes dentate, na then? ठीक है? अरे संध्या, इतना सारा प्यार, thank you. Okay. Getting saturated. Ask me. Okay. No G, not enough. We were supposed to finish CNS. Better house, 9:30. We will finish at 9:30. Class is till 9:30. Dobara mat puchna. Let's see basal ganglia. Let's go on to basal ganglia. Are it? Now, as far as the basal ganglia is concerned, right? Basal ganglia, right? So this is the, when you look at the basal ganglia, what is basal ganglia? This is involved again in motor planning. And basal ganglia are also involved in coordination. Basal ganglia is involved in motor planning and in coordination, right? These are involved in coordination of the automatic and associated movements. See, the cerebellum is involved in coordination and the basal ganglia is also involved in coordination. So this is involved in coordination of automatic and associated movements. Now, what is an associated movement? Associated movement is, the example of an associated movement is swinging of the arms while walking. Swinging of the arms while walking. Swinging of the arms while walking. This is an associated movement. This is under basal ganglia coordination. Swinging of the arms while walking becomes a basal ganglia coordination, right? Let's look at another one. Facial expressions while talking. Facial expressions while talking. These are also facial expressions while talking. These are also an example of basal ganglia coordination. Facial expressions while talking, isn't it? That is also an example of basal ganglia coordination. Okay? So this is involved in coordination of automatic and associated movement. Facial expressions while talking is an associated movement. Yes, this I'm moving my hands and arms while talking to you is also an associated movement. This is under the control of basal ganglia. Now, what is an automatic movement? Right? Any skilled movement which you acquire with practice. Any skilled movement Yes, any skilled movement which is acquired with practice, that is known as an automatic movement. What are the examples of automatic movement? For example, using a pair of scissors. Right? Using a pair of scissors, it is completely automatic. You have learned how to use a pair of scissors. When you cut a piece of paper, I give you a piece of scissors and I say, "He paper kaat ke dikhao." That is automatic movement. It's a skilled movement which has been acquired with practice. That is automatic. That is under the coordination of basic ganglia. Right? For example, when you strike ball with a bat while playing cricket, right? This is again almost an automatic movement, isn't it? Which you have acquired with practice. So that is if you know how to play cricket. If you ask me to play cricket, I do not know how to do that. So it is not going to be coordinated by the basic ganglia, but by the cerebellum. Have you understood? Here, the automatic movement, whenever a movement becomes automatic, it is going to be controlled by the set. It is going to be coordinated by the basic ganglia. So what is the cerebellar coordination? What is the cerebellar coordination? Now, cerebellum is involved in coordination of deliberate movements. This is involved in coordination of deliberate movements. And a typical example of a deliberate movement is when kill a fly. Killing of a fly is a deliberate movement. Yes, there is sufficient practice during lockdown for killing a fly. Yes, but it still continues to be deliberate. It is not an automatic movement. Practice तो बहुत किया, लेकिन फिर भी अभी automatic नहीं है. While killing a fly, cerebellum controls the rate, it will control the range, it will control the force, and it will control the direction of movement. Cerebellum controls the rate, range, force, and direction of movement. This is true, but please remember this is for deliberate movements, not for automatic. When a movement becomes automatic, basal ganglia takes over. Cerebellum is for deliberate movements. Have you understood? Right? Cycling will become, once you learn how to cycle, it becomes basal ganglia coordination. Please remember there is an overlap between the two. It is not that he sirf cerebellum ye karega, sirf basal ganglia ye karega. No, there is an overlap between cerebellum and basal ganglia. But if you have an MCQ, you should be able to say this. Automatic associated movements, coordination by basal ganglia. Deliberate movements like killing of a fly, coordination by cerebellum. Right? Now, Varshita, will we call it you see, it is also deliberate, it is sort of overlap. Have you understood? So that means if there's a cerebellar lesion, it will affect writing. So also basal ganglia lesion. It is deliberate plus automatic, both. Right? So there is an overlap which is seen. Now, as far as the basal ganglia is concerned, what are the parts of the basal ganglia? Naiji, the app is not crashing. Nothing is happening. I can see it here. ठीक है? उल्लू किसी और को बनाना. ठीक है? I can see it here. There's nothing wrong with the app. App is fine. Okay. So this is, now what are the parts of the basal ganglia? What are the parts of the basal ganglia? Number one is caudate nucleus. Caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus. Globus pallidus. Globus pallidus, there is a external segment, globus pallidus external segment, and globus pallidus internal segment. Globus pallidus external segment and globus pallidus internal segment. Caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus external segment, globus pallidus internal segment. Then number four, you have the substantia nigra. Substantia nigra is further subdivided into substantia nigra pars reticularis, substantia nigra pars reticularis, and substantia nigra pars compacta. Substantia nigra pars reticularis and substantia nigra pars compacta. Caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus, external segment, globus pallidus, internal segment, substantia nigra pars reticularis and substantia nigra pars compacta. And number 5 is the subthalamic nucleus. Subthalamus nucleus of Lewis. Yes? Subthalamic nucleus of Lewis. So these are the 5 components of the basal ganglia. What are the 5 components? Caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus, substantia nigra, and subthalamic nucleus of Lewis. Right? Subthalamic nucleus of Lewis. Okay. Now, there is a difference between the anatomical classification and the physiological classification. Now, anatomy says that the putamen and the globus pallidus, this is known as the lenticular nucleus. This is known as the lenticular nucleus. And the caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus are together known as the corpus striatum. Right? Corpus striatum. Okay. Corpus striatum. So if the question says corpus striatum, right? Corpus striatum means it is an anatomical classification. That means it includes the caudate nucleus, putamen, and the globus pallidus. Why is it known as corpus striatum? Because corpus striatum means it has got a striated appearance under the microscope. Okay? Striated appearance under the microscope. So if the question says corpus striatum, your answer is caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus. Yes? But if the question says striatum, now striatum is caudate nucleus and putamen. So if the question says only striatum, then your answer is caudate nucleus and putamen. But if it says corpus striatum, caudate nucleus, putamen, globus pallidus. Corpus striatum, anatomical classification. Striatum, physiological classification. Now, 95% of the striatal neurons, 95% of the striatal neurons secrete GABA. 5% of the striatal neurons secrete acetylcholine and somatostatin. Again, somatostatin, please remember, is a large molecule, slowly acting neurotransmitter. It is not just a hormone, it is also a neurotransmitter. Right? So 95% of the striatal neurons will secrete GABA and 5% of the striatal neurons will secrete acetylcholine and somatostatin. Globus pallidus external segment secretes GABA. Globus pallidus internal segment also secretes GABA. Substantia nigra pars reticularis secretes GABA. But pars compacta secretes dopamine, isn't it? We know that in Parkinson's, it is the substantia nigra pars compacta neurons will be affected in Parkinson's. In Parkinson's, there is going to be loss of pars compacta, dopaminergic neurons. Subthalamic nucleus of Lewis is the only one. Subthalamic nucleus of Lewis is the only one which secretes glutamate. Subthalamic nucleus of Lewis is the only one which secretes glutamate. Right? It is an excite. So this has been asked as a question. Glutamate is secreted by the only part of the basal ganglia which secretes an excitatory neurotransmitter is the subthalamic nucleus of Lewis. Right? Again, 95% of the striatal neurons will secrete GABA. 95% of the striatal neurons secrete GABA. 5% secrete acetylcholine and somatostatin. Globus pallidus external segment secretes GABA. Internal segment secretes GABA. Substantia nigra pars reticularis secretes GABA. Pars compacta secretes dopamine. In Parkinson's, it is the pars compacta neurons which are going to be affected. Subthalamic nucleus of Lewis is the only one which secretes an excitatory neurotransmitter, and that is glutamate. So these are the different parts of the basal ganglia and what are the neurotransmitters secreted by these neurotransmitters secreted by the different parts of the basal ganglia. Okay? Swapnadeep, thalamus to kar liya. Swapnadeep, thalamus kar liya, isn't it? Right? Okay. So these are the parts of the basal ganglia and the neurotransmitters secreted by these different parts. Now let us see what are the major pathways. No, 9:30. 9:30 is class is going to be till 9:30. Please do not disturb. In case you wish to leave, you are free to do so. I have no problems with that. I can't even see you, so I can't even. Okay. All right. So this is as far as your different parts of the basal ganglia are concerned. Now, what are the major pathways? What are the major pathways? What are the major pathways in the basal ganglia? The first one is what is called the first one is an intrastriatal major pathways of the basal ganglia. Major pathways of the basal ganglia. There is an intrastriatal cholinergic pathway. Intrastriatal cholinergic pathway. Right? Intrastriatal cholinergic pathway. Between the caudate nucleus and the striatum, you've got a cholinergic pathway. Intrastriatal cholinergic pathway. Second is a striatonigral. Striatonigral. From striatum to substantia nigra pars reticularis. This is a GABAergic pathway. Right? This is a GABAergic pathway. Number 3. From substantia nigra, nigrostriatal dopaminergic pathway. The third pathway is nigrostriatal. Right? From substantia nigra pars compacta to striatum. Striatonigral from striatum to substantia nigra pars reticularis. Yes, that is a GABAergic pathway. Nigrostriatal dopaminergic pathway. Dopaminergic pathway. That means, very important question. Where are the dopamine receptors? Where are the dopamine receptors? Dopamine receptors are present on the striatum. Because what is the pathway? Nigrostriatal. Substantia nigra pars compacta neurons will secrete dopamine, but the dopamine receptors are on the striatum. And these dopamine receptors are of two types. There is D1 and D2. D1 is excitatory and D2 is inhibitory. D1 is excitatory and D2 are inhibitory neurons. Not neurons, receptors. Yes, receptors, the dopamine receptors, like I said, they are present in the striatum. There are two types. This is D1 is excitatory and D2 is inhibitory. Now, let's see this. The fourth pathway of the basal ganglia. This is nigrostriatal dopaminergic pathway. Then the fourth pathway is what is known as striatopallidal. From striatum to globus pallidus, this is a GABAergic pathway. GABAergic pathway. From the striatum to globus pallidus, it is a GABAergic pathway. Number 5, we've already discussed this, subthalamic nucleus of Lewis. Subthalamic nucleus of Lewis to the globus pallidus. And which is a neurotransmitter which is secreted? We've already discussed that. The neurotransmitter subthalamic nucleus is glutamate. Glutamate, right? So subthalamic nucleus of Lewis to the globus pallidus, this is a glutamate pathway. So these pathways, right? Let's see them once again. Intrastriatal cholinergic pathway. Striatonigral, from the striatum to the substantia nigra, that is a GABAergic pathway. Nigrostriatum, from substantia nigra to pars compacta to striatum, dopaminergic. In other words, dopamine receptors are present on the striatum, and there are two types of dopamine receptors, D1, which is excitatory, and D2, which is inhibitory. Striatopallidal, from the striatum to the globus pallidus, it is a GABAergic pathway. From the subthalamic nucleus of Lewis to the globus pallidus, this is a glutamate pathway. So these are your 5 important pathways which are present in basal ganglia. Very few questions have come from the basal ganglia, which I've already discussed with you. Glutamate is secreted by subthalamic nucleus of Lewis. Which neurons are destroyed in Parkinson's? And that is substantia nigra pars compacta. Substantia nigra pars compacta. Okay? So this is as far as your basal ganglia is concerned. Next, let's go on to what are known as postural reflexes. Let's see postural reflexes. Yes? Postural reflexes. Now, these are reflexes which help to maintain posture. Postural reflexes, these are reflexes which help to maintain posture. Now, postural reflexes can be spinal. That means the center is the spinal cord. They could be medullary. That means the center is the medulla, right? And number 3, they could be midbrain reflexes. Midbrain reflexes, or there can be cortical reflexes. Cortical reflexes. So postural reflexes, let's discuss this very interesting topic, and that is, and again, high yielding, straightforward one-liners have come from postural reflexes in the last 3 years, and a very high yielding topic. So simple thing is asked, which reflex is integrated where? So the areas are spinal, medullary, midbrain, cortical, right? Now let us see which are these spinal reflexes. I've already discussed 2 extremely important spinal reflexes with you, and that is, we've done it in detail, a lot of detail, and that is the stretch reflex, and we also discussed what is the inverse stretch reflex. Stretch reflex and the inverse stretch reflex. Right? Stretch reflex and the inverse stretch reflex, already discussed. Then let's look at this. This is a we've discussed this. This is a monosynaptic reflex, spinal reflex, and inverse stretch reflex was a bisynaptic reflex. Okay. Then let's see, there is another spinal reflex, which is polysynaptic, and that is what is known as a positive supporting reaction. Positive supporting reaction. Now, what is a positive supporting reaction? Positive supporting reaction is positive supporting reaction is the receptors for the positive supporting reaction. This is positive supporting reaction is also known as the magnet reaction. Right? Positive supporting reaction is also known as the magnet reaction. Now here, what are the receptors for this positive supporting reaction? The receptors for the positive supporting reaction are the touch receptors. These are the touch receptors on the footpad. Touch receptors on the footpad are your receptors for the positive supporting reaction. So when these touch receptors come in contact with a flat surface, yes, there is an extension of that limb, right? Touch receptors when the touch receptors when the touch receptors are in contact, when the touch receptors on the footpad, right? When the touch receptors are on the footpad, when the touch receptors on the footpad are in contact with a flat surface, right? When the touch receptors are in contact with a flat surface, this causes now an extension of that limb. There is an extension of that limb. This is known as a positive supporting reaction or a magnet reaction. What are the receptors for the positive supporting reaction? Yes, as soon as the footpad comes in contact with the flat surface, there is an extension of that limb. That is known as positive supporting reaction. And the fourth reflex, spinal reflex, this is the negative supporting reaction. Negative supporting reaction. And what is the negative supporting reaction? Negative supporting reaction is as soon as the contact of the touch receptors is lost from the ground. As soon as the contact is lost, there is now a flexion of that limb. There is a flexion of that limb. If the activation of the touch receptors is lost, flexion of that limb. So this is what is known as supporting reaction. This is also a spinal reflex. This is a polysynaptic and a spinal reflex. So I've done 4 spinal reflexes with you. Stretch reflex, already covered. Inverse stretch reflex, positive supporting, negative supporting. Then, yes, elicited in neonatal reflexes. Absolutely true. Then number 5, you have standing. Standing is also a spinal reflex. Standing is a spinal reflex. Somebody said, Aisha, you said walking. Absolutely right. Walking is also a spinal reflex. Number 7, galloping. Galloping is seen in horses. This is also a spinal reflex, right? Galloping is seen in horses, which is a spinal reflex. Okay? Right? So these are your 7 spinal reflexes: stretch reflex, inverse stretch reflex, positive supporting reaction, negative supporting reaction, standing, walking, galloping. Galloping occurs in horses. These are all spinal reflexes. The next one is medullary reflexes. Which are the medullary reflexes? That means the center is going to be the medulla. Which are the medullary reflexes? Number 1, the tonic neck reflex. Tonic neck reflex. Tonic neck reflex. Let's see which is the spinal reflexes. Like I said, Spinal reflexes, stretch reflex, inverse stretch reflex, positive supporting. Touch receptors are activated. They come in contact with the flat surface. They come in contact with the flat surface, extension of that limb. That is called positive supporting. Negative supporting. Negative supporting is when the contact with the ground is lost, flexion of that limb. That is called negative supporting. Standing, walking, galloping. These are your spinal reflexes. Yes? Medullary reflexes. Which are the medullary reflexes? This is called tonic neck reflex. Tonic neck reflex. Tonic neck reflex. In this case, tonic neck reflex is the receptors for the tonic neck reflex is the neck proprioceptors. Tonic neck reflex are the receptors are the neck proprioceptors. Change in the position of the neck. Change in position of the neck causes change in position of the neck. This causes a change in posture. Change in position of the neck causes a change in posture, right? Change in position of the neck causes a change in posture. For example, extension of the neck. Extension of the neck. This will cause an extension of the forelimbs. Extension of the forelimbs and flexion of the hind limbs, right? Extension of the neck causes extension of the forelimbs and flexion of the hind limbs, right? That is a tonic neck reflex. What are the receptors for the tonic neck reflex? The neck proprioceptors. Whenever there is a change in the position of the neck, there is a change in posture. Have you understood? Right? Extension of the neck causes extension of the forelimbs, flexion of the hind limbs. A very common kind of an example, let's say if this is a table here, yes, let's say this is you have a doggy and there is a bowl which is present on the table and there is a bone on the table, yes. So what happens is your doggy is looking at this. His neck is extended, right? So what happens when his neck is extended? His neck is extended. So his forelimbs are extended. His aage wala pair is extended. And his piche wala pair is flexed, right? Right? Something like that. This is what happens. The extension of the forelimbs. Neck is extended. There is an extension of the forelimbs and a flexion of the hind limbs. You've placed something on the table. He wants that. His neck is extended, so his front limbs will be extended and the hind limbs are flexed. Okay? This is what is known as the tonic neck reflex. Extension of the neck, extension of forelimbs and flexion of the hind limbs. And what happens if there is a flexion of the neck? This is a dog. This is a bone. Okay? His neck is extended. So his aage wala pair is extended. Piche wala is peacock. It looks like a peacock. Okay, doesn't matter. This is a cross between a peacock and a dog. Now imagine how it happened. Flexion of the neck. No. Karnan, very important point. You're sitting in a chair and extended neck, no result. Please remember, we are not animals. In humans, the cortex controls all the lower areas. Cortex will inhibit all these lower reflexes. Have you understood? What is the center for this reflex? Medulla. So cortex will inhibit these reflexes. If there is a lesion, if the connection between the cortex and the medulla is gone, then you will be able to elicit these reflexes. Have you understood? Right? In a normal individual, you will not be able to see this. Is that clear? Because the cortex will inhibit the lower areas. Okay? All right. Yes, it is seen in a neonate as well. All right. Flexion of the neck causes, now the reverse, there is a flexion of the forelimbs. flexion of the forelimbs, and extension of the hind limbs. Yes, extension of the hind limbs. These are your, this is what happens. This is what is known as the tonic neck reflexes. Showing thus, too much. Imagination is just too much. Okay, so this is flexion of the neck, this is flexion of the forelimbs, and extension of the hind limbs. This is this is tonic neck reflexes. Then you have a second category of medullary reflexes, which are known as labyrinthine reflexes. Labyrinthine labyrinthine or the vestibular reflexes. Labyrinthine or the vestibular reflexes. This is also a medullary reflex. And what is the labyrinthine or the vestibular reflex? It keeps the head horizontal. It keeps the head horizontal with respect to the ground. It keeps the head horizontal with respect to the ground, right? It keeps the head horizontal with respect to the ground. Yes. So this is what is known as the labyrinthine or the vestibular reflex. It keeps the head horizontal with respect to the ground. What are the receptors for the labyrinthine or the vestibular reflex? The receptors for the labyrinthine or the vestibular reflex, this is going to be the semicircular canals. Semicircular canals. Right? Semicircular canals. The otoliths which are present in the semicircular canals, these are the receptors, and they keep the head horizontal with respect to the ground. Yes, this is a labyrinthine or a vestibular reflex. So two reflexes which are integrated in the medulla, tonic neck reflexes and the labyrinthine or the vestibular reflex. Let's have a look at what is the midbrain reflexes. Let's see what are the midbrain reflexes. Now, what are the midbrain reflexes? Midbrain reflexes are all writing reflexes. All writing reflexes. These are integrated in the midbrain. All the writing reflexes. Now, what is a writing reflex? Please pay attention to the spelling. This is R-I-G-H-T. Writing reflexes. Writing means writing of posture. This is correction of posture, writing of posture or correction of posture. So this is a writing reflex. All writing reflexes, these are integrated. All writing reflexes are integrated in the midbrain. All writing reflexes are integrated in the midbrain, except the visual writing reflex. Except the visual writing reflex. All writing. Now, what is a writing reflex? Now, writing reflex is like, for instance, when you're walking, somebody comes and gives you a push. There is an automatic correction of posture which prevents you from falling down. That is called a writing reflex. And writing reflexes will be writing reflexes is integrated at the level of the midbrain. And what are these writing reflexes? What are these writing reflexes? Writing reflexes could be head-on-body writing reflex. What is a head writing reflex? If the push is given over the head, correction of body posture. That is called head-on-body. Another one is called body-on-body. Body-on-body writing reflex. What is body-on-body? That means you give a push on the body and writing of body posture. So that is called a head-on-body, body-on-body. Right? This is your writing reflexes. These are correction of body posture. Push on the head, head on body. Push on the body, writing of body posture, body on body. Visual writing reflex is a cortical reflex, isn't it? Cortical reflex. See, we can discuss what is a visual writing reflex. A very interesting kind of an example in what is a visual writing reflex. Now, visual writing reflex. Now, this is correction of body posture based on visual input. For example, if you are, let's say, in a well-lit room, right? Well-lit room, lot of light, you stumble against something. You are less likely to fall down because there is a visual writing of posture. If it is a dark room, right? In a dark room, there is no visual writing, right? Visual writing is going to be lost. Visual writing is lost, so more likely to fall down, isn't it? In a dark room, you are walking and you stumble against something, you are more likely to fall down because in a dark room there is obviously no visual writing reflex. There is no visual input, right? So this is your okay. Now another very interesting example. Two people are going on a motorcycle. They meet with an accident. What do we hear? Who gets hurt more? Who gets more severe injuries? The fellow who's riding the bike or the fellow who's sitting behind? Isn't it? Very commonly, two people are going on a two-wheeler, a motorcycle or a scooter or something. They meet with an accident. Who gets hurt more? The rider or the pillion? It's always the pillion who gets hurt, right? In a two-wheeler accident, it is the pillion, the fellow who's sitting behind, isn't it? Pillion gets more severe injuries. Why so? Because what happens is the fellow who's riding the bike, his eyes were more or less on the road. So when they hit against something, there is visual writing, prevented severe injury. But the fellow who's sitting behind, he's enjoying himself. He's looking at all the sights. Yes. So his visual writing is not active. So invariably, he gets hurt much more. That is why they say if you're sitting behind someone, your eyes should always be on the road. That is your visual writing reflex. Visual writing reflex. Okay? In fact, if you look at all motorcycles, the rear seat is always a little elevated, isn't it? The rear seat, if you look at a good motorcycle, the rear seat is always slightly elevated. And the reason is the person who is sitting behind should be able to see the road. Yes, so that his visual writing reflex is active. That is the reason why the rear seat is slightly elevated. This is what is meant by visual writing. Okay? So always, if you're sitting behind someone, eyes have to be on the road. No texting while driving, please. Texting while driving has been found to be worse than drunken driving. No texting while driving. Have you understood? No listening to the phone, no attending calls while driving. Visual, no texting while driving. Okay? It is worse than drunken driving. All right, so this is your writing. All writing reflexes are in the midbrain except the visual writing reflex. What are the fourth category is cortical reflexes. Which are the cortical reflexes? Cortical reflexes are hopping, placement, this is cortical. Hopping, langari tongue, that is hopping. What is a placement reaction? Placement is a placement reaction is like, for instance, if you have something in your hand which interests an experimental animal. Let's say you have a banana, there's a monkey in front of you. Wherever you keep the banana, he will automatically reach for that. That is called placement. Right? So this is cortical are hopping and placement reactions. Let's see one last question for the day. Which of the following is medullary reflex? This is a question which has been asked in your NEET exam. Which of the following is a medullary reflex? A, positive supporting reaction. This is spinal. This is not a medullary reflex. This is centered as a spinal cord. B, writing reflexes. Writing reflexes are mainly midbrain. Writing reflexes are mainly midbrain. Yes? C, hopping and placement reactions. Hopping and placement reactions. Hopping and placement is cortical. Hopping and placement is cortical. So answer is obviously D. The tonic neck reflexes. Tonic neck reflexes are your medullary reflex. Please understand this once again. Okay. ठीक है, what is placement? जहां केला रखोगे वहां monkey जाएगा. That is placement. ठीक है? All right. So this is, let's see this once again. Which are the spinal reflexes? Let's go through this list once again quickly. Stretch reflex, inverse stretch reflex, positive supporting, neck, standing, walking, galloping. Which are the receptors for positive supporting and negative supporting? Touch receptors on the foot pad. Medullary reflexes, tonic neck reflexes, receptors, neck proprioceptors, change position of neck, change in body posture, extension of neck, extension of forelimb, flexion of hind limb, flexion of neck, flexion of forelimb, extension of hind limb. Labyrinthine vestibular reflex receptors are in the semicircular canals. They keep the head horizontal with respect to the ground. What are the midbrain reflexes? All writing reflexes are integrated in the midbrain except visual writing. Which are these writing reflexes? Head on body, body on body. Visual writing reflex is a cortical reflex. I gave you examples of visual writing reflex. Cortical reflexes are hopping, placement reactions. This was the last question which I discussed with you. Which of the following is a medullary reflex? And that is a tonic neck reflex. Visual writing is cortical. Visual writing is cortical. Small topics in CNS are left, which we will take up the next time, and then we'll do the remaining chapters. Small topics like hypothalamus, EEG, sleep, I'll take that in the next time. Okay? Visual reflex, cortical. Okay? All right, please revise. You have done an important chapter today, which is slightly difficult to understand, and that is CNS. Go through your notes. You can, again, I've already told you where you can send your queries to me. I'll try and answer them to the best that I can. Okay? All right, chalo. Bye-bye. Good night.